I looked out the window at the rain, which had been falling continuously for the third day. Typical weather for Tacoma at this time of year. My old house, where I had lived for almost 40 years, seemed like a quiet refuge from the rest of the world. Too quiet, to be honest. Since Eleanor died 5 years ago, I often found myself talking out loud just to break the silence. 73 years isn't that long when you've spent most of your life in a courtroom sending criminals to jail. My daily ritual was simple. Up at 6 in the morning, a cup of strong coffee, watching the morning news, then a walk around the neighborhood, weather permitting, of course. After retiring as district attorney, I didn't know how to fill the sudden void in my life. At first, I had plans to travel with Eleanor, but cancer took her before we had a chance to buy suitcases. The doorbell snapped me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the clock. It was 3 in the afternoon. Too early for the mailman, too late for deliveries. With some difficulty, I got up from my chair. My knee was acting up again and headed for the door. Standing on the doorstep were my daughter Imogen, her husband Gareth, and a man in a formal suit whom I didn't recognize. I knew right away that this wasn't a social visit. "Dad, you haven't answered your phone all day." Imogen tried to kiss me on the cheek, but I pulled away. "We were worried." "My phone works fine," I replied, letting them in. "If I don't answer, it means I don't want to talk." Gareth, as always, looked impeccable. Ironed shirt, expensive watch, well-groomed beard. 17 years of marriage to my daughter had not brought him closer to me. The third man stood behind, studying the interior of my house with professional interest. "Teddy," Gareth extended his hand. "This is Mr. Whitaker, a lawyer from Pearson and Associates." "I don't need a lawyer," I snapped, ignoring his outstretched hand. "Actually, Dad," Imogen sat down on the edge of the sofa, "we think you do." I smiled, recognizing that tone. It was the same tone she used when she was 12 and convinced me she needed a new bike because all the girls have them. Eleanor had always been softer with her only daughter, and I was away too often, busy with work and my career. "Mr. Farnsworth," the lawyer placed a leather folder on the coffee table, "we are concerned about your well-being." "My well-being?" I glanced around my immaculately clean house. I may have lived alone, but I kept things tidy. Eleanor would have been proud of me. "Yes, Father." Imogen came up to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "The last time we were here, you forgot to turn off the stove. And a month ago, Mrs. Jenkins' neighbors saw you wandering around the street in your bathrobe." "I was taking out the trash," I protested. "And it was 7 in the morning when normal people are still asleep." "It doesn't matter, Dad," Imogen exchanged glances with Gareth. "We don't think it's safe for you to live alone." The lawyer cleared his throat discreetly and opened a folder. "Mr. Farnsworth, your daughter and son-in-law are concerned that you may be a danger to yourself due to your age and circumstances. They have prepared partial guardianship papers that will allow them to." Guardianship? I nearly choked with indignation. "Are you out of your mind? I was a district attorney for 35 years. I put more criminals behind bars than you've lived days, young man." "Dad, it's for your own good," Imogen insisted. "Gareth and I have already found a wonderful place in North Tacoma. It's called Golden Years. It has a garden, medical staff." "I'm not going to a nursing home." I slammed my fist on the table with such force that the cups jumped. "And I certainly won't let you control my money and property." Gareth, who had been silent until then, spoke up. "Teddy, be reasonable. This house is too big for one person. It costs money to maintain. What if you fall? What if something happens at night?" "The same thing that would have happened if I had fallen 20 years ago," I snapped. "I'll call an ambulance." A memory suddenly came to mind. Imogen, 7 years old, holding my hand at my father's funeral. "Why did Grandpa leave, Daddy?" she asked. And I can't find the words to explain the concept of death to a child. Eleanor hugs us both, whispering something comforting to her daughter. We were a family then, a real family. "Please just look at the documents." The lawyer moved the folder closer. "It's limited guardianship. You will retain control over day-to-day decisions, but in matters of finance and medical care." I stood up, feeling anger rising inside me. "I want you all to leave. Now, Dad, now," I pointed to the door, "and take your papers with you. I am of sound mind and memory, and if any of you try to challenge this in court, you will regret it." Gareth got up first, saying something quietly to the lawyer. The lawyer gathered his papers and headed for the door. Imogen lingered. "You don't think about us at all," she said, her voice tinged with hurt. "How we feel. When Mom was alive." "Don't you dare!" My voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Don't you dare use the memory of your mother." Imogen pursed her lips but said nothing. A minute later they were all gone, leaving me alone in the silence of the house, which suddenly felt like a cage. I sank into an armchair, feeling my hands tremble. Eleanor would have known what to do. She always knew how to smooth things over between me and my daughter. When Imogen was a teenager, our arguments could last for days, but Eleanor found compromises, built bridges where I saw only chasms. "Teddy, she's just looking for your attention," Eleanor would say when Imogen came home at 15 with a pierced nose. "She's your carbon copy, just as stubborn, just as passionate." But after meeting Gareth in her senior year of college, Imogen changed. Gareth Holloway, one of the Holloways, as my daughter liked to emphasize, came from a family with money and connections. His father owned a chain of car dealerships across the state, and his mother sat on several charitable boards. For a girl who grew up in a civil servant's family, it seemed like a brilliant match. But I saw through him from the first meeting. His handshake was too firm, his smile didn't reach his eyes, and he talked constantly about money and connections. "He's using you to get to my contacts in the prosecutor's office," I told Imogen after they got engaged. It was our first serious argument. Eleanor took her daughter's side and the wedding went ahead. The first few years of their marriage were normal. Grandchildren were born, Cormac and Tabitha. I loved spending time with them, especially Cormac, who inherited my love of detective novels and chess. But with each passing year, the visits became less frequent and the phone calls shorter. Imogen talked more and more about being busy and having other commitments. And then Eleanor fell ill. Pancreatic cancer, late stage. We fought for 2 years. Chemotherapy, experimental treatments, trips to specialists. I retired to be with her. Imogen came on weekends, always in a hurry, always looking at her watch. Gareth hardly ever showed up, citing work. When Eleanor died, something broke between me and my daughter for good. At the funeral, she kept her distance, as if she were performing a social ritual. And a month later, the talk began about, "You need to think about the future, Dad," about selling the house, about prudent financial management. I got up and walked over to Eleanor's photo on the mantelpiece. She was smiling, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. It was our 30th anniversary, and we had gone to the mountains, just the two of us. The last truly happy year before the diagnosis. "What would you do, Ellie?" I asked the photo. Of course, there was no answer. Suddenly, I felt very old and very tired. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's really time for me to go to Golden Years or whatever that prison for old people is called. Number. I clenched my fists. I won't give up without a fight. For 35 years, I fought for justice in court, never backing down in the face of threats and pressure, not to end up letting my own daughter and her husband control my life. I went to the secretary and took out a folder with financial documents. After Eleanor's death, I systematized all our assets. The house was paid off in full. I had savings, stocks, a pension. If you add it all up, I was a well-off man, well off enough to start from scratch if necessary. And then it dawned on me. If they wanted my house and my money, well, let them try to find them. I took out the phone book and started flipping through it. I needed a real estate agent, not a local one, to avoid leaks, and preferably one I could trust. The name Winifred Pendleton came to mind. Winnie had been a witness in one of my first cases. She was just starting her career in real estate at the time. If she was still in the business? I dialed the directory assistant's number and asked to be connected to Pendleton and Associates Real Estate. A minute later, a familiar hoarse voice came on the line. "Winifred Pendleton speaking." "Winnie, it's Thaddeus Farnsworth," I said. "Do you remember me?" There was a pause, then laughter. "You old devil. Of course I remember you. The Harrison case, 98. You saved my ass from that defense attorney." I smiled for the first time that day. "I need your help, Vinny, and complete confidentiality." "Anything for you, counselor. What are you up to?" "I want to sell my house," I said, "and buy a new one. But I don't want anyone to know, especially my family." On the other end of the line, Vinny whistled. "Sounds interesting. When can we meet?" "The sooner the better," I said, looking out the window at Gareth's car driving away. I have a feeling we don't have much time. Tomorrow at 10, Joe's Cafe on Proctor Street. Do you know it? I'll find it, I replied. And Thaddeus? Vinny's voice took on a conspiratorial tone. Don't worry. We'll show them. I hung up and went back to the window. The rain had stopped, and rays of the setting sun were breaking through the clouds. Maybe it was a sign. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control, like I had a plan. Imogen and Gareth wanted games? Well, they were going to get them. But I would set the rules. I was going to make a move they didn't expect. And God willing, I was going to enjoy every minute of this game. Joe's Cafe was exactly as I expected. A small, cozy place with worn leather couches and the smell of freshly ground coffee. I arrived 20 minutes early to choose a table away from the windows. An old prosecutor's habit. Always sit with your back to the wall, facing the door. At exactly 10 o'clock, the bell above the entrance rang, and Winifred Pendleton entered the cafe. In more than 20 years, she had hardly changed. The same red hair, now streaked with gray, the same confident gait. Except that the wrinkles around her eyes had deepened, and her clothes were more expensive. A dark blue business suit instead of the budget blouses she wore when we first met at the trial. Thaddeus, she spotted me and headed for my table, attracting the attention of several patrons. You haven't changed a bit, you old fox. I stood up to greet her, and she gave me a big hug. She smelled of expensive perfume and menthol cigarettes. Winnie, I gestured for her to sit down. Thank you for coming. Any time for you? She sat down in the chair opposite me and glanced around the cafe. Nice place. I never would have thought I'd find you in such a bohemian establishment. Times are changing, I shrugged. I'm trying to keep up. The waitress approached and Winnie ordered a double espresso. I remained faithful to my Americano. So, Winnie leaned forward, lowering her voice. Tell me, what's going on? The last I heard, you retired after Eleanor passed away. My condolences, by the way. She was a wonderful woman. Thank you, I nodded, trying not to show how much it still hurt to hear my wife's name from strangers. The situation is rather delicate. My daughter and her husband have decided that I'm too old to live on my own. Yesterday, they came to me with a lawyer and guardianship papers. Winnie whistled, but immediately stopped when she saw my look. Damn it, Thaddeus. What are you going to do? Something they don't expect, I said, taking an envelope out of my jacket's inside pocket and placing it on the table. Here's information about my house. All the documents, the appraisal, the maintenance history. I want you to find a buyer. Quickly and without any fuss, Winnie took the envelope but didn't open it. What about your new house? Do you have anything in mind yet? No, I shook my head, but I have requirements. The North End neighborhood, preferably something secluded with a good security system. I'm willing to pay above market price for the right option in a quick deal. The waitress brought our drinks, and we fell silent while she set out the cups. Listen, Thaddeus, Vinny took a sip of espresso. I can sell your house through a front man. I have an agent, Rachel Snow, who can represent you so that your name doesn't appear anywhere. But buying a new house is more complicated. All transactions leave traces. I have an idea, I leaned closer. My old friend Bartholomew Keegan. He's been my lawyer on many occasions. We can put the purchase in his name, and then he'll transfer the title to me. It's all legal, but it's not immediately traceable. Vinny tapped her fingernails thoughtfully on the table. That could work. If your brother-in-law is so keen to control your finances, he'll definitely be monitoring large transactions. Exactly, I nodded. That's why I withdrew some of my savings in cash. Small amounts from different banks over the last month, thoughtful. Vinny smiled. You've always been one step ahead, Attorney General. We spent the next hour discussing the details. Winnie made a few phone calls and arranged a meeting with Rachel Snow for the next day. I gave her Bart Keegan's contact information, and she promised to contact him to work out the legal aspects. Teddy, Vinny said as we said goodbye at the cafe exit, are you sure you want to do this? Moving at your age is very stressful. I've lived in that house for 40 years, Vinny, I replied. Every corner reminds me of Eleanor. Maybe a change of scenery is just what I need. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Okay, I'll call you as soon as Rachel has appraised the house and we've found some suitable options in North End. Don't call my home phone, my son, I warned. Only my cell. God, Thaddeus, Vinny laughed. You've really turned this into a special operation. Better safe than sorry, I shook her hand. Thanks, Vinny. On my way home, I felt a strange excitement. For the first time in a long time, I had a goal, a plan of action. It reminded me of the times when I was preparing for a difficult trial. The same anticipation of battle, the same focus. Rachel Snow turned out to be a young, energetic woman with a piercing gaze and a habit of talking nonstop. She inspected my house, clicking her camera and taking notes on her tablet. Great location, Mr. Farnsworth, she said, pacing the living room. Close to the school and the park. Potential buyers will appreciate that. The kitchen is a little outdated, but overall the house is in good condition. I think we can list it for $650,000 and see what happens. How long will it take to sell? I asked. In the current market? She tapped her chin with her pen. At the right price, 2 to 3 weeks. But if you're in a hurry, we can lower the price and find a buyer in just a few days. Speed is more important than money, I said. Rachel nodded, looking unsurprised. Apparently, Vinny had already explained the situation to her, or at least the version she needed to know. Then 600,000. I'll place the ad today, and we'll have the first viewings by the weekend. And that's how it turned out. By Saturday, 3 pairs of potential buyers had already viewed my house. On Sunday, 4 more. By Monday, Rachel had 2 offers, one for $580,000, the other for $595,000. We'll take the second one, I said when she called me. How soon can they close the deal? They're ready to put down a deposit immediately. They can close in 2 weeks. Great. Go ahead. Meanwhile, Vinny found several options in North End. We met at the same cafe, and she showed me photos and floor plans of 3 houses. This one is too exposed, I rejected the first option, and this one is too small. The third house caught my attention right away. It was a 2-story Victorian mansion, built in the early 20th century and recently renovated. It had a large lot surrounded by a hedge. It was in a secluded location at the end of a cul-de-sac. It's perfect, I said, looking at the photos. How much? $1,200,000, Winnie replied. The last renovation was 2 years ago. New roof, new wiring, heating system, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, study, library, and most importantly, a top-of-the-line security system. The former owner was paranoid. Motion sensors everywhere, reinforced doors and windows. Sounds tempting. I put the photos down. When can we see it? Today if you like, Vinny smiled. The house has been empty for 3 months. The owner has moved to Europe and wants to sell quickly. We went to see the house right after the cafe. Vinny drove her Jaguar and I sat in the passenger seat, watching the Tacoma neighborhoods change outside the window. The further we went into North End, the larger and more luxurious the houses became, and the more well-kept the streets looked. Here we are. Vinny turned onto a narrow street lined with old maple trees. At the end, a house was partially hidden behind a tall hedge. She stopped the car at the gate and entered the code on the electronic panel. The gate opened silently. Impressive, I remarked as we pulled up to the house. Up close, it looked even more majestic than in the photos. Dark blue, almost black, with white window frames and a red front door. A wide porch encircled the first floor. On the second floor, a balcony overlooked the backyard, where a small but well-kept garden was visible. Winnie opened the front door and let me go first. Inside, the house was bright and spacious. High ceilings, wooden floors, large windows. The living room flowed smoothly into the dining room, and from there into a modern kitchen with an island in the middle. Do you like it? Winnie asked, watching my reaction. Very much. I couldn't hide my admiration. Let's see the rest. We walked through the entire house, 4 bedrooms on the second floor, all with their own bathrooms. A study with built-in bookcases, a library with a fireplace, a basement where the previous owner had set up a gym and wine cellar. What do you think? Winnie asked when we returned to the living room. I'll take it, I replied without hesitation. How long will it take to close the deal? If we use the Bart Keegan scheme and cash for the deposit, we can close the deal in a week. Vinny thought for a moment. But there's one problem. The sale will still appear in public records. If your brother-in-law works in real estate, he's an appraiser, I confirmed. Then he may find out that the house has been sold. But he won't necessarily find out who bought it, especially if the documents are made out to Keegan. That's a risk I'm willing to take. I looked around again. This house is worth it. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Bart Keegan, my old friend and lawyer, agreed to help with the paperwork. I put down a deposit on the new house, $200,000 in cash, which I gradually withdrew from my accounts over the course of a month. Vinny and Rachel Snow coordinated the sale of my old house. Imogen called twice, but I didn't answer. Once she showed up unannounced, but I pretended I wasn't home. I wasn't ready for a confrontation until I had my plan in place. 10 days after our first meeting with Vinny, I signed all the papers to buy the house in North End. Bartholomew Keegan was officially the owner, but we had already prepared the paperwork to transfer ownership to me. It was set to take effect in a month. Congratulations, Thaddeus. Bart shook my hand after the signing. Now you own one of the most beautiful houses in Tacoma. Thanks for your help, Bart. I was truly grateful. Without you, this would have been impossible. Anything for an old friend, he smiled. But are you sure you don't want to just talk to your daughter? Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. You didn't see their faces when they came with those custody papers. I shook my head. They think I'm an old man who can't take care of himself. Let them think that. Until they find out the truth, Bart sighed but didn't argue. 2 weeks after we started our operation with Vinny, I sold my old house and received a check for $595,000. With my savings, I had more than $800,000 left after buying a new house. You're a rich man, Thaddeus, Vinny remarked when we met at the cafe for the last time. What are you going to do with all that money? Live with dignity, I replied, and make sure my grandchildren get a good education. Especially Cormac. There's something about that boy. What about Imogen and her husband? Winnie asked cautiously. When are you going to tell them about the move? When the time is right, I finished my coffee. First, I need to move my things and settle into my new place. And then we'll see. We said goodbye at the cafe. Vinny hugged me and wished me luck. Be careful, Thaddeus, she said, and call if you need help. I will, I waved to her as she got into her car. When I got home, I started planning the move. I decided to leave most of the furniture behind. It was old and held too many memories. I wanted to take only the essentials to my new home. Books, clothes, a few family heirlooms, and, of course, Eleanor's photographs. I hired a small moving company, specifically choosing one based in Seattle rather than Tacoma. Less chance of anyone finding out about my move. That evening, while sorting through documents, I found an old photo album. In one of them, Imogen, 6 years old, was sitting on my shoulders at the Tacoma Zoo. We were both smiling, carefree and happy. What happened to that little girl? When did she turn into a woman who sees her father only as a burden and a source of inheritance? I closed the album and put it in a box with my moving stuff. The past should stay in the past. Now I was looking to the future, a future I had chosen for myself. The next day I got a message from Vinny. There's a problem. Call me. I dialed her number, feeling my heart beat faster. What's wrong? I asked as soon as she answered. Your brother-in-law, Vinny's voice sounded tense. He works at Holloway and Partners, right? Yes, I confirmed. He's a real estate appraiser. Why do you ask? The paperwork for your new house went through their office for appraisal, Vinny explained. It's standard procedure for these kinds of deals. His name doesn't appear on the reports, but he could have seen them, I finished for her. Exactly. I don't know if he connected it to you in any way because formally the buyer's Bart Keegan. But if he knows your friends, he knows. I felt a chill run down my spine. Bart was at our golden wedding anniversary with Eleanor. Damn, Vinny cursed. What are we going to do? I thought for a moment. Nothing, I decided. We'll stick to the plan. Even if Gareth suspects something, he won't be able to prove that the house is connected to me. And when the truth comes out, well, that will be interesting. Are you sure? There was doubt in Winnie's voice. Absolutely, I smiled. You know, Winnie, a long time ago, I cornered one of the most dangerous criminals in Tacoma. He threatened me and my family. Do you know what I said to him? What? I said, make your worst move, then watch me make mine. Winnie laughed. You're impossible, Thaddeus. Okay, let's stick to the plan. Let me know when you move your things. I hung up the phone feeling strangely calm. Maybe Gareth already knew about the house. Maybe he and Imogen were already making plans to use that information against me. But now I was ready. I had my own plan. And unlike them, I wasn't going to underestimate my opponent. The move to the new house was scheduled for Tuesday. I arranged with the moving company to come in the afternoon, but I decided to go there in the morning to take another look at the place and make a plan for the furniture layout. At 10 o'clock, I got into a taxi, gave the address, and leaned back in my seat, watching the familiar streets of Tacoma flash by outside the window. Nice neighborhood, the driver remarked as we entered North End. Have you lived here long? Just moving in, I replied. You're lucky, he nodded. It's all rich people here, and beautiful, old houses. I didn't continue the conversation, lost in my own thoughts. After Vinny's call, I couldn't shake my uneasiness. If Gareth really had seen the house documents, what would he do? Would he tell Imogen? Or would he decide to scope out the situation first? The taxi stopped at the gate. I paid, waited for the car to drive away, and only then entered the code on the keypad. The gate opened, and I walked along the gravel path to the house, enjoying the silence and the scent of pine coming from the trees surrounding the property. Something was wrong. I noticed it before I even reached the porch. There was a car parked near the house, a black Lexus that I recognized immediately. Gareth's car. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped, looking around. Maybe he was just passing by? No, that was unlikely. This house was at the end of a dead-end street. You couldn't get here by accident. I quietly approached the side of the house, trying not to be seen if anyone was looking out the windows. Voices came from the open living room window. I cautiously approached, listening. The perfect place for us, Gareth was saying. I would recognize his smug tone anywhere. Look at these ceilings, the finishes. A house like this is worth at least $1.5 million now. But how did you find out about it? It was Imogen's voice. And why are you so sure we can afford it? I pressed myself against the wall of the house, barely breathing. They were inside, in my house, discussing buying it. Trust me, dear, Gareth replied. The documents went through our office. I saw Keegan's name and immediately understood what was going on. Your father is up to something, but he's always been too predictable. Do you think he bought this house? Why? Obviously to annoy us. The old man dug in his heels and decided to show that he can do without our help. Typical Tedious. Proud to the point of absurdity. The voices grew louder as they moved from room to room. Let's go upstairs, Gareth said. I want to show you the bedrooms. I quickly circled the house and looked through a first-floor window on the other side. 4 figures crossed the living room. Gareth, Imogen, and my 2 grandchildren, Cormac and Tabitha. Cormac looked uncomfortable, constantly looking back as if he felt like an uninvited guest. Tabitha, on the other hand, excitedly examined the room, pointing out various details of the interior. I ducked behind the bushes as they went upstairs. The window upstairs was slightly open, and their voices were clearly audible again. This will be our bedroom, Gareth said with the enthusiasm of someone who already considered the house his own. The master bedroom overlooking the garden. We'll put our bed here, and over there in the corner we can make a dressing room. Where will Grandpa live? It was Cormac's voice. My heart sank. At least one person in this family was thinking about me. Oh, your grandfather, Gareth's voice took on a condescending tone. He'll be in the bedroom next door. It's smaller but perfectly comfortable for someone his age. He doesn't need a lot of space. But it's his house, Cormac objected. Didn't he buy it? Technically, yes, Imogen interjected. But your grandfather is no longer at an age where he can manage such a large house. We'll help him. Exactly, Gareth chimed in. We need to take a rational approach here. Your mother and I will look after the house, do the bills, and clean up. Grandpa just needs a small room to sleep and relax. Will this be my room? Tabitha asked, and judging by the sound of her footsteps, she had moved to the other side of the hallway. Yes, sweetie, Imogen replied. Do you like it? It's huge, and it has a view of the street. Can I paint the walls pink? Of course, Gareth sounded generous. We'll renovate it to your liking. Where will my room be? Cormac asked. His voice sounded wary. At the end of the hallway, Gareth replied. Not as big as Tabitha's, but it has its own bathroom. You'll like it. Will Mom be living with us? Cormac asked again. I mean, Grandma? There was a pause. Of course, Cormac, Imogen finally said, but there was no confidence in her voice. She can come visit. We'll have a guest room downstairs. A guest room? Cormac's voice was clearly disapproving. She's your mother. Cormac, Gareth's tone became harsh. Don't start. We've already discussed this. Your grandmother prefers her own apartment, and she has her quirks. I stepped away from the window, feeling anger boiling up inside me. They were already dividing up my house, assigning rooms, planning renovations, and none of them had even asked my opinion. I was particularly hurt by their attitude toward Imogen's mother. Marilyn, my first wife, whom I divorced when Imogen was only 5. After the divorce, she moved to Seattle, where she still lives. We maintained a polite relationship for our daughter's sake, but Marilyn always kept her distance, as did Imogen with her. And now it turned out that they weren't even planning to give her a proper room in the house. I heard the group coming down the stairs. I quickly moved behind the house and hid by the back porch. The door opened and they came out onto the terrace. "We can set up a barbecue area here," Gareth said, gesturing around the space. "We'll put a big table here for family dinners. And over there, in the corner of the garden, we could have a hot tub." "I don't think Grandpa needs a hot tub," Cormac remarked. "It's not for your grandfather," Gareth snapped. "It's for us. We'll be living here for many years after." He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. After I die. They were already planning their lives in my house after my death. "Gareth," Imogen said warningly, nodding toward the children. "Sorry," he cleared his throat. "I meant to say it's a long-term investment for our family." They returned to the house and I remained in my hiding place, seething with rage. My own daughter and her husband were already disposing of my property, my life, as if I were no longer there, as if I were just an inconvenient obstacle to their well-being. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close, then the sound of an engine starting. Peeking around the corner, I saw a black Lexus driving out of the gate. When the car was out of sight, I slowly emerged from my hiding place. My hands were still shaking with anger. I climbed the porch steps and opened the door with my key. Inside, the house felt defiled by their presence. I walked through the rooms, imagining how they planned to settle in here. I went upstairs and looked into the master bedroom, which Gareth had already mentally claimed for himself. Then into the small room next door, where they were going to put me. "No way," I muttered aloud. Going back downstairs, I took out my phone and dialed Winnie's number. "They were here," I said as soon as she answered. "Who?" Winnie didn't understand. "Gareth, Imogen, the kids. They were looking around the house, dividing up the rooms." Gareth had already chosen the master bedroom for himself. "Damn it," Winnie cursed. "How did they get in?" "I don't know," I said, looking around for signs of a break-in. "Maybe they have keys. Maybe Gareth got them through his company." "What are you going to do?" I thought for a moment. "We need to change the locks today and install a security system. Cameras, alarms, everything we can." "I'll call my guy," Vinny said. "He can be there in an hour. Will you be there?" "Yes, I'm not going anywhere," I replied. "And Vinny, thank you." She snorted. "You're welcome, prosecutor." "Hang in there." I hung up and looked around the house again. There was a framed photo on the mantelpiece in the living room. The previous owners had forgotten to take it with them. A happy middle-aged couple in front of the Eiffel Tower. I took the photo and put it in a drawer. I'll put Eleanor's photo in its place. An hour later, the locksmith arrived, a burly man with tattoos on his arms and a toolbox. "Mr. Farnsworth?" He held out his hand. "Jesse Martinez. Mrs. Pendleton said you needed to change the locks." "All the locks," I clarified. "The front door, the back door, the garage door. And if possible, install additional bolts." "No problem," Jesse nodded. "I have everything with me. I'll start right away." While he was working, I called the moving company and asked them to expedite the delivery of my belongings. They agreed to come at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Shortly after the locksmith arrived, a security specialist arrived. A young man with a laptop and several boxes of equipment. "Alex Chen," he introduced himself. "Mrs. Pendleton said you need a top-of-the-line security system." "That's right," I confirmed. "Cameras at all entrances, motion sensors, alarms, and I want to be able to monitor everything from my phone." Alex nodded, already surveying the room with a professional eye. "That can be arranged. You already have a basic system here. You just need to upgrade it and add cameras. Is there anyone in particular you're worried about?" I hesitated before answering. "Let's just say I have reason to believe that some people might try to come in here uninvited." Alex smiled knowingly. "Got it. We'll make sure that not even a mouse can get through unnoticed." For the next few hours, the house resembled an anthill. Jesse changed the locks. Alex installed cameras and sensors. At 3 o'clock, a truck arrived with my belongings, and two strong guys began carrying in boxes and furniture. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the work was mostly complete. The new locks were installed, the security system was up and running, and most of my belongings had been unloaded, though not unpacked. Here you go, Mr. Farnsworth. Alex handed me a tablet. This is the control panel for the entire system. From here, you can control the cameras, view recordings, and change settings. I also installed an app on your phone. Now you can monitor the house from anywhere in the world. He showed me how the system worked, how to view camera recordings, and how to activate and deactivate the alarm. And this, he took a small device that looked like a key fob out of his pocket, is the emergency button. Press it, and the alarm will go directly to the security company. They will contact the police. Excellent, I was impressed. How much do I owe you? Everything has already been paid, Mrs. Pendleton, Alex replied. She said you would settle up with her later. I nodded, mentally noting that I needed to thank Vinny. She always knew how to make my life easier. When everyone left, I was alone in my new home. The silence seemed almost palpable after the hustle and bustle of the day. I walked through the rooms, getting used to the space, to the idea that this was now my home. In the living room, I unpacked the first box, the one with the photographs. Eleanor's portrait took pride of place on the mantelpiece. I stood in front of it, remembering how we had dreamed of a house like this at the beginning of our marriage. At the time, it seemed like an unattainable fantasy for a young assistant district attorney. It's a shame she didn't live to see this day. You'd be proud of me, Ellie, I said to the photograph. The old dog can still learn new tricks. I went up to the master bedroom, the one Gareth had so confidently chosen for himself. I spread the sheets on the bed, unpacked a few boxes of clothes, and arranged my personal belongings on the dressing table. I was settling in, marking my territory. On the tablet Alex had left behind, I checked the camera recordings. Everything was working perfectly. Now no one could enter my house without my knowledge. In the evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the last rays of the sun paint the sky over Tacoma in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the past, from other people's expectations, from constant pressure and manipulation. They thought they could control me, dictate my life, my property. They thought I was an old man who couldn't take care of himself. How wrong they were. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out. It was Imogen calling. For the first time in 2 weeks, I decided to answer. Dad? Her voice sounded surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to pick up. Where are you? I came to your house, but you weren't there. I moved, I said calmly. Moved? She was clearly confused. Where? Why didn't you say anything? Why should I have said anything? I countered. The last time we saw each other, you tried to take away my right to control my own life. Dad, we're just worried about you. Enough, Imogen, I interrupted her. I know you and Gareth were at my new house today. I know you've already assigned rooms, including a tiny cubbyhole for me. There was a long pause. How did you? It doesn't matter. I took a sip of whiskey. What matters is that I live here now. And yes, this is my house. Mine alone. And if any of you try to come in here without my permission again, I'll call the police. Dad, you don't understand. No, Imogen, you don't understand. My voice hardened. I'm not a helpless old man. I don't need your care, and I won't let you and Gareth control my life. Gareth said you might react this way, she said accusingly. You've always been stubborn. Even Mom said, don't you dare, I almost hissed. Don't you dare use Eleanor's memory. Fine, Imogen sighed, but we need to talk. All of us, as a family. Not now. I felt my emotions starting to get the better of me, and I didn't want to show weakness. Maybe later. I need to settle in, Dad. Good night, Imogen. I ended the call without waiting for a response. Night fell on Tacoma, enveloping my new home in shadows. I sat on the porch, finishing my whiskey, enjoying the silence and solitude. This was my fortress, my refuge, and I was ready to defend it from any uninvited guests. After all, I had spent 35 years defending laws and rules for other people. Now it was time to defend my own rules and boundaries. And God knows I was going to do it with all the thoroughness and ingenuity that a former district attorney was capable of. When it got too cold to sit on the porch, I went back inside. The security tablet flashed, indicating that no movement had been detected. All the cameras were working. All the sensors were active. My new home was well protected. I went up to the master bedroom, my bedroom, and lay down on the bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in many years, I felt not only anger or bitterness, but also a strange, almost forgotten feeling. Triumph. I had won this round, and I was ready for the next one. I woke up unusually cheerful on my first morning in my new home. Sunlight streamed through the tall bedroom windows, painting the walls in warm hues. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and glanced around my new domain. A well-kept garden surrounded by a hedge, a path leading to a gazebo in the far corner of the plot, trees rustling in the light breeze. All of this now belonged to me. After breakfast, I set about unpacking the remaining boxes. There was a lot of work to be done. Books, clothes, dishes, personal items accumulated over decades of life. Eleanor always said that I was too attached to material things, but each of them held memories that I didn't want to lose. At noon, I took a break and checked the security system. Everything was working perfectly. The cameras transmitted a clear image to my tablet, and the motion sensors reacted to the slightest movement. I felt like the captain on the bridge of an impregnable ship. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the system sounded an alarm. Someone was approaching the gate. I glanced at the tablet screen and saw a familiar black Lexus. Gareth and Imogen. I smiled as I watched them try to enter the access code on the panel at the gate, the code that had been changed yesterday. After several failed attempts, Imogen took out her phone. A moment later, my own phone rang. Yes, I answered in as neutral a tone as possible. Dad, we're at your house. Imogen's voice sounded irritated. The code isn't working. I changed it, I replied calmly. Why? For security reasons. Apparently too many people knew the old code. Pause. I could almost physically feel Imogen struggling with herself, trying to find the right words. We want to talk, she finally said. Let us in. Not today, I replied. I'm busy. Moving house, isn't the easiest thing to do at my age. Dad, that's ridiculous. We can help. No need, I interrupted her. I'm doing just fine on my own. When I'm ready for visitors, I'll let you know. Gareth wants to talk to you, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. Tell Gareth I'm busy, I said and hung up. On the tablet screen, I could see Imogen explaining something heatedly to Gareth. He looked furious, gesturing wildly and pointing at the house. Then he got into his car and slammed the door. Imogen followed him, and a moment later the Lexus drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. I went back to unpacking the boxes, feeling strangely satisfied. The first round was definitely mine. That evening, Gareth called me himself. I could have ignored the call, but I decided it was time to hear what he had to say without Imogen's mediation. Teddy, he began without greeting me, this has to stop. What exactly? I asked innocently. This game you're playing. This house. These secrets. You're acting like a child. That's an interesting observation from someone who entered someone else's house without permission and started assigning rooms, I retorted. Gareth sighed with feigned patience. Look, I understand you're upset, but we really want to help. Imogen is worried about you. We all are. So worried that you're already planning how you're going to live in my house after I die? I couldn't hold back the sarcasm. Pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in Gareth's head as he tried to find a way out of this situation. You've got it all wrong, he finally said. We were just looking at the house. We thought it might be a good place for the whole family, together. You wouldn't be alone. Gareth, I interrupted. Let's be honest. You and Imogen want to control my finances and property. You think I'm an old man who can't take care of himself. You even brought a lawyer with guardianship papers. So please don't insult my intelligence with this talk of caring. His tone changed instantly. Fine, Thaddeus. You want to play dirty? I'll play dirty. I have evidence of your incompetence. Forgotten stove, wandering the streets in inappropriate clothing, refusing medical attention. I can file for a compulsory examination. Go ahead, my voice turned cold. I was a district attorney for 35 years. Every judge in this city knows me personally. And they know you, Gareth. Your reputation, your methods. Who do you think they'll believe? Another pause, a longer one. You're making a mistake, he finally said. A big mistake. Maybe, or I agreed. But it's my mistake. And my house. And my life. I hung up the phone, feeling the adrenaline pulsing through my veins. It had been a long time since I had felt such excitement, since the days of difficult court cases. The next few days passed relatively calmly. I finished unpacking, arranged the books in the library, and hung the paintings. The house was gradually becoming mine. Every room, every corner was acquiring familiar features, filling up with my things, my memories. Imogen called every day, but I usually didn't answer. When I did pick up, the conversation quickly descended into mutual recriminations. She accused me of selfishness and stubbornness, and I reminded her of her attempt to place me under guardianship. Neither of us was willing to back down. On the fourth day, the security system detected visitors again. This time, it wasn't Gareth's Lexus at the gate, but a modest sedan. My grandson, Cormac, got out of it. I immediately got up from my chair and headed for the front door. Cormac was tall for his 17 years, with dark hair that he wore slightly longer than his father approved. A serious, thoughtful boy, he always reminded me of myself in my youth. "Grandpa," he hugged me as soon as I opened the door. "I knew you'd be here." "Cormac?" I was genuinely happy to see him. "Come in, grandson." "How did you find me?" "It wasn't that hard," he shrugged as he stepped inside. "I saw the papers on my father's desk. They had this address and Mr. Keegan's name on them. I remember you talking to him at my mother's wedding. Smart boy, much smarter than his parents thought." "Did you come alone?" I asked, looking over his shoulder. "Yes," he nodded. "My parents don't know I'm here." I told them I was going to a friend's house to study for exams. I led him into the living room, where we settled into armchairs by the fireplace. Cormac looked around the room with curiosity. "It's a beautiful house," he remarked. "Much bigger than the old one." "Yes," I agreed. "Maybe even too big for one old man. But I like it." "You're not an old man, Grandpa," Cormac frowned. "And you don't have to live alone if you don't want to." "What if I do?" I asked gently. He thought about it. "Then that's your right," he finally said. "But Mom and Dad—" "I know what your parents think," I interrupted him. "They think I need supervision. That I can't make my own decisions." "That's not true," Cormac shook his head. "They just—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "They're too focused on money." Especially Dad, I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Cormac rarely criticized his parents, and if he was starting now, it meant he had good reason. "Ever since Uncle Richard sold his stake in the company, Dad has been obsessed with expansion," Cormac continued. "He talks constantly about new offices, new employees. But that requires money, a lot of money." Richard was Gareth's brother, the junior partner in the family real estate appraisal firm. I vaguely remembered that a few months ago he had decided to sell his share and move to California. "And your father thinks my money can help?" I guessed. Cormac nodded, avoiding my gaze. "I heard him and Mom discussing it. Dad said that your savings in your house are exactly what he needs for the next step, and Mom said that you wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money anyway." I felt anger rising inside me, but I tried not to show it. I didn't want to upset my grandson anymore. "What do you think, Cormac?" I asked. He looked up at me with sincerity in his eyes. "I think it's your money and your life, Grandpa, and no one has the right to decide for you." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. This boy had more honor and common sense than both his parents put together. "Thank you, Cormac. That means a lot to me." We were silent for a moment. Then Cormac asked, "What happens now? With you? With the house? With us?" I sighed. I wanted to tell him about my plan, about the cameras, about how I was going to put his parents in their place. But he was just a child, despite his maturity. I couldn't drag him into this war. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Right now I just want to live peacefully, settle into my new home. We'll see what happens." "Mom is very upset," Cormac said. "She cried yesterday. She said you push her away, that you've always been like that, keeping your distance, never showing that you love her. It was a blow below the belt. I really wasn't the perfect father. I worked too much and spent too little time at home. Eleanor often reproached me for this. But did I love my daughter? Absolutely." "It's complicated, Cormac," I said after a pause. "Relationships between parents and children are always complicated. Your mother and I, we were never particularly close. Not like she was with your grandmother, Eleanor. But that doesn't mean I didn't love her. I just didn't always know how to show it. But now you could start over, Cormac said hopefully. Maybe if you talked, really talked. Maybe, I said, not wanting to dash his hopes. In time. When we both cooled down a bit, Cormac nodded, accepting my answer. Then his gaze fell on the chessboard I had set up on the table by the window. Shall we play? He suggested with a smile. Of course, I was glad of the change of subject. White or black? Black, he replied as always. Cormac liked to defend, to build complex combinations rather than attack directly. We spent the next hour playing chess. He won the first game, I won the second. The third ended in a draw. All the while we talked about neutral things, his school, the books we were reading, the movies we had seen. Not about family, not about home, not about money. When it was time for him to leave, I walked him to the gate. Grandpa, Cormac said before getting into the car, I want you to know that whatever happens between you and my parents, I'll always be on your side. I hugged him, feeling a lump in my throat. Thank you, grandson. That means a lot to me. Can I come visit? He asked hopefully. Anytime, I replied. You're always welcome in my home. I watched his car drive away down the road and thought that maybe there was a silver lining to the story. Maybe this situation would help me get closer to my grandson, understand him better, be the grandfather I always wanted to be. Back at the house, I checked the cameras and the day's recordings. Everything was working perfectly. Gareth and Imogen hadn't shown up, but I knew it was only a temporary lull. They wouldn't give up so easily. In the evening, Vinnie called. How's it going, prosecutor? She asked in her hoarse voice. Settling in. Little by little, I replied. Thanks for your help with all this, especially with the security system. You're welcome, she chuckled. How is the family reacting? Predictably, I told her about Gareth and Imogen's calls and their attempts to get into the house. My grandson came by today. Smart boy, he found me himself. And what did you tell him? The truth, partially, that I want to live on my own, that it's my right. I didn't tell him about the cameras or what I'm planning to do next. That's wise, Vinnie agreed. Children shouldn't be dragged into adult wars. We talked a little more. Then she asked, what are you going to do next? Do you have a plan? Yes, I replied after a pause. For now, I'm just watching, gathering information, waiting for them to make their next move. A waiting game, Winnie nodded knowingly. A classic prosecutor's tactic. Give the suspect enough rope to hang himself. Something like that, I agreed. Let's see what they do next. On the 6th day of my stay in the new house, the security system went off again. This time it wasn't Gareth and Imogen, nor was it Cormac. A police car was parked at the gate. I walked up to the gate and saw a familiar face, Sergeant Michael Donovan, with whom we had worked on several cases in the past. Teddy, he smiled when he saw me. So this is where you live now. Impressive. Mike, I shook his hand. What brings you here? Your daughter, he said, looking a little embarrassed. She filed a missing person report. She said you disappeared from your home without leaving a note or saying where you were going. She was worried. I couldn't help but chuckle. As you can see, I'm alive and well. I just moved. Imogen knows that perfectly well. She calls me every day. Mike shook his head. I figured as much, but we had to check. It's procedure. Can I let her know you're okay? Sure, I nodded. And tell her that next time she wants to know where I am, she should just ask me directly instead of using the police as a middleman. Mike laughed. I'll pass that on word for word. Glad to see you're in good shape, Thaddeus. Many at the station still remember your court appearances. After he left, I returned to the house, thinking about Imogen's new move. A missing person report was no joke. She was clearly trying to create the impression that I was incapable of taking care of myself, that I had disappeared without warning. Was she laying the groundwork for a future custody suit? That evening, she called me herself. The police were at your place, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I confirmed. Interesting move, Imogen. Reporting missing someone who calls you every day? You didn't answer for 3 days, she said, her voice tinged with hurt. I was worried. Not enough to come and check for yourself, I countered. You won't let us into the house? Because I don't want to see you, I said bluntly. At least not yet. Is that so hard to understand? Silence on her part. Then, Dad, this can't go on forever. We're a family. We need to talk. I agree, I said. But not now. I need time. For what? Her voice sounded irritated. To figure out what I want from this relationship, I replied honestly. From you, from Gareth, from myself. Another pause. Okay, she finally said. I'll give you time. But Dad, don't cut us out of your life completely. Please. There was something in her voice that reminded me of little Imogen asking to leave the light on in the hallway at night. A vulnerability she rarely showed in her adult life. I won't, I promised, but I need space and respect for my choice. I understand, she sighed. Cormac said he visited you. Yes, I confirmed. He's a good boy. I know, she said, her voice warm for the first time in a long time. He's a lot like you, Dad. Stubborn, principled, sometimes too smart for his own good. I smiled despite myself. The worst of my qualities. And the best, she added quietly. We said goodbye on that note, more peaceful than usual. I wasn't sure if it was a genuine moment of connection or part of her strategy. Imogen always knew how to manipulate people when she wanted to. The seventh day passed without incident. I took care of some business matters, called my financial advisor to discuss changes in my investment portfolio, and read a book in the garden. I enjoyed the peace, which I suspected was temporary. In the evening, I sat in my office reviewing the camera footage from the past week. On one of them, I noticed something strange. A black Lexus driving past the house several times at different times of the day. It didn't stop at the gate, just drove down the street and left. Surveillance? Perhaps. I made a note to check other cameras in the area if the opportunity arose. Gareth was clearly planning something, and I wanted to know what. As I went to bed that night, I thought about my conversation with Cormac, about what he said about his parents, their financial difficulties, Gareth's desire to expand the business. It all added up to an interesting picture. Maybe the attempt to establish guardianship over me wasn't just a desire to control a stubborn old father. Maybe there were specific financial interests behind it. I decided it was time to move on to the next phase of my plan. A week of waiting and watching had given me enough information. Now it was time to act. But first I had to review all the camera recordings, gather all the evidence, and prepare for the final confrontation. With these thoughts, I fell asleep, feeling more confident than I had in years. The waiting game was coming to an end. Soon it would be time to make my move. The next morning was rainy. I woke up to the sound of raindrops drumming on the roof, a soothing rhythm that always helped me think. Lying in bed, I thought about how it was finally time to review all the surveillance camera footage. Over the past week, I had only checked it selectively when the system alerted me to movement at the gate or around the house. But I knew that the cameras could have captured other events that did not trigger the sensors. After breakfast, I settled into my study with a cup of coffee and my tablet connected to the security system. Alex, the security specialist, had created a user-friendly interface that allowed me to view the recordings by date and camera. I decided to start with the first day after my move and methodically work my way forward. The first few hours of viewing revealed nothing new. I saw visits I was already familiar with. Gareth and Imogen at the gate, trying to enter the code, Cormac arriving in his sedan, police officer Mike Donovan checking the report of my disappearance. There were other visitors too, the mailman, the delivery man who brought the groceries I had ordered online, a neighbor who stopped by to introduce himself. But on the third day, something caught my attention. The camera at the gate recorded Gareth's black Lexus driving past the house around 11 p.m. An unusually late time for a visit. He didn't stop at the gate, just drove slowly past, as if surveying the area. I switched to the camera feed facing the street and saw that the car had parked around the corner, out of sight from my house. A few minutes later, 3 figures emerged from the car. Gareth, Imogen, and another person I didn't immediately recognize. They didn't go to the gate, but headed along the hedge surrounding my property. I quickly switched between cameras, trying not to lose sight of them. One of the cameras installed at the back corner of the house showed the trio stopping at a section of the fence where the hedge was sparser. They were talking quietly about something, examining the fence and the space behind it. Gareth was pointing at something, and the third person was taking notes in a notebook. I zoomed in and finally recognized him. It was that lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, who had brought the custody papers to my house. They spent about 15 minutes there, walking around the perimeter of the property, then returned to their car and drove away. What was that? Reconnaissance? Planning an invasion? I made a note to check that section of the fence. Perhaps they were looking for a weak spot in my defenses. I continued watching. The next day, around 3 in the afternoon, the cameras recorded another visit. This time it was just Imogen. She arrived in her car, stopped at the gate, but didn't try to enter or call me. Instead, she just sat in her car, looking at the house. After a while, she took out her phone, took a few pictures of the house, and drove away. Why did she need the photos? What did she use them for? The fifth day brought the most interesting discovery. The camera at the gate recorded the arrival of the familiar black Lexus at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Gareth and Imogen were with their lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, again. But this time, they didn't walk around the perimeter. They just stopped at the gate. The camera with a microphone installed next to the intercom recorded their conversation. "Are you sure this will work?" Imogen's voice sounded worried. "Absolutely," replied Mr. Whitaker. "We have testimony from neighbors about his strange behavior, a police report about his disappearance, documents about his refusal of medical care, plus this impulsive move and refusal to communicate with his family. All of this can be interpreted as signs of dementia or other mental disorders." "But he's a former prosecutor," Imogen objected. "He has connections all over the city." "Which became obsolete 10 years ago," Gareth dismissed dismissively. "Most of the judges he worked with are either retired or dead. And the new ones don't know him personally." "Nevertheless, Your Sereno," the lawyer continued, "we need to proceed with caution. I suggest we start with a request for a medical examination. If we can prove that he is a danger to himself—" "He's not dangerous," Imogen interrupted. "He's just stubborn." "Stubbornness at his age is dangerous," Gareth said irritably. "Damn it, Imogen, we've talked about this. Your father sits alone in a huge house, refuses help, doesn't take his prescribed medication. That's exactly what we need to prove to the court." I froze, stunned. Medication? What was he talking about? "I only took vitamins and a blood pressure medication, and even that was irregular because the doctor said my condition wasn't critical." "What happens next?" Imogen asked after a pause. "After the examination, if the doctors confirm our concerns, we will file for full guardianship," explained Mr. Whitaker. "Financial and medical. This means that you will be able to manage his funds, make decisions about his treatment and place of residence." "And we can sell the houses?" asked Gareth. "Both of them?" "Yes, if it's in his best interest," the lawyer nodded. "For example, if the funds are needed to pay for medical care or a nursing home." I felt anger boiling up inside me. They were already planning to sell my houses. Both of them. The old one I had already sold and the new one I had just moved into. "What about his pension and investments?" Gareth continued. "Everything will be under your control," Whitaker confirmed. "Of course, you will have to report your expenses to the court, but that's a formality. Most judges don't get into the details as long as the total amount matches the ward's stated needs." Gareth nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. That's exactly what we need. With these funds, I can buy out Richard's share and expand the business." "Gareth!" Imogen looked shocked. "We're talking about my father's money, which he's not using anyway," Gareth retorted. "Look at this house. He spent over $1 million on real estate he doesn't even need. At his age. It's crazy, Imogen. He's clearly not in a position to make rational financial decisions." "May I remind you," Mr. Whitaker interjected, "that the purpose of guardianship is to protect Mr. Farnsworth's interests. Any action must be in his best interest." "Of course," Gareth quickly agreed. "That's exactly what I'm saying. What could be better for an elderly person than knowing that his family is financially secure? That his grandchildren will receive a good education? That his son-in-law's business is thriving?" The lawyer nodded, but his face showed that he was not entirely convinced. "In any case," he continued, "we first need to arrange for a medical examination. I've prepared the documents. All I need is your signatures." They took some papers out of their briefcases and began signing them, using the hood of the car as a table. I switched to another camera, trying to see what the documents were, but they were too far away. "What about Golden Years?" Imogen asked when they were done with the papers. "You said it was a good place." "Forget Golden Years," Gareth dismissed. "It's too expensive." I found another place, Pine Grove on the outskirts of Tacoma, much cheaper, and they take Medicare. "I've heard some not-so-great reviews about Pine Grove," Imogen said uncertainly. "They say it's understaffed, and the conditions, Anything is better than living alone in a huge house, Gareth interrupted her. Besides, it's a temporary solution. Once we sort out his finances and sell the houses, we can think about something more comfortable. I felt a chill run down my spine. Pine Grove, I knew that place. When I was a prosecutor, we investigated several cases of patient neglect at that facility. Nothing criminal enough to take to court, but enough to earn a bad reputation. And Gareth wanted to send me there. Mr. Whitaker, Imogen's voice sounded uncertain. Is there no way to resolve this peacefully? Maybe if we talk to my father again. You saw how he reacted, Gareth said irritably. He won't listen. He thinks he knows best. It's a classic case of an elderly person in denial about their problems and refusing help. Gareth is right, the lawyer confirmed. In situations like this, it's rare to reach a compromise. Older people often don't realize their condition and resist any change. Sometimes the only way to help them is to act decisively, even if it causes temporary discontent. Imogen didn't look convinced, but she nodded. What's next? I'll file these papers today, said Mr. Whitaker. Given all the circumstances, I think we'll get a medical examination order within a week. After that, everything will depend on the doctor's conclusions. What if he refuses to undergo the examination? Asked Imogen. That will only strengthen our position, smiled the lawyer. Refusal of medical care will be interpreted as another sign of incapacity. Perfect. Gareth rubbed his hands together. Either way, we'll gain control of the situation. They got in the car and drove away, and I sat in front of the screen, stunned by what I had heard. They didn't just want to control me. They planned to take everything from me, my home, my money, my freedom, and use my own resources to expand Gareth's business. I continued watching the recordings, but the following days brought nothing as shocking. There were a few more drives by the black Lexus past the house, one visit from Imogen, who just stood at the gate without trying to enter or ring the bell. She looked pensive, even sad. Perhaps her conscience was bothering her after all. On the seventh day, around the same time I was talking to Cormac in the living room, the camera at the back fence detected movement. Two people in dark clothing were examining the same section of the hedge that Gareth and the lawyer had previously studied. They were measuring something and taking notes. Their faces were obscured by caps pulled down over their eyes, but the build of one of them resembled Gareth's. What were they planning? Breaking into the house? Burglary? Or were they just surveying the area for some other purpose? I made copies of all the important recordings and saved them on a separate flash drive. This was serious evidence of their intentions, which could come in handy if the case went to court. That evening, the system recorded another visit. This time it wasn't Gareth's Lexus, but another car, a silver sedan that I didn't recognize. Gareth and another man I hadn't seen before got out of it. They stopped at the gate, and Gareth pointed to the house, explaining something to his companion. The man took out a camera with a long lens and took several pictures of the house and the grounds. A photographer? A real estate appraiser? Or a private investigator gathering evidence of my incapacity? In any case, it didn't bode well. I decided to call Bart Keegan and tell him about my findings. As a lawyer, he could advise me on how to defend myself against their plans. This is serious, Thaddeus, Bart said after listening to me. If they file for a medical examination and get a court order, you'll either have to comply or risk having your refusal used against you. What do you suggest? I asked. Get ahead of them, Bart thought for a moment. Get an independent medical examination from a doctor you trust. Get a report on your legal capacity before they take action. Good idea, I agreed. But is that enough? No, Bart admitted. We need more. These recordings are a great start. They reveal Gareth's true motives and cast doubt on Imogen's purity of intent. But we need a strategy. We agreed to meet the next day to discuss next steps. I thanked Bart and hung up. Alone again, I replayed the recording of the conversation at the gate. Gareth's words about Pine Grove, about selling my houses, about using my money for his business, echoed in my head over and over again. How could my daughter's husband, a man I had known for 17 years, be so calculating, so ruthless? And Imogen? I wanted to believe that she had simply succumbed to her husband's influence, that somewhere deep down she still cared about her father. But her agreement with these plans, her willingness to send me to a cheap nursing home with a bad reputation, it hurt deeper than I could have imagined. I remembered holding her in my arms, a newborn, tiny, teaching her to ride a bike, taking her to her first day of school, sitting next to her when she cried over her first broken heart. Where was that little girl who looked at me with adoration? When did she turn into this cold, calculating woman, ready to send her father to a prison-like institution for financial gain? Maybe it was my fault. I certainly wasn't the perfect father. I worked too much and spent too little time at home. Eleanor often reproached me for this. "You're building a career, but you're losing your daughter," she would say. I dismissed her, believing that financial security was more important, that Imogen would appreciate it when she grew up. And this is where it led. My own daughter considered me nothing more than a nuisance, a source of money to be used for her own purposes, a person who could be sent to a cheap nursing home and forgotten. I went out onto the porch needing some fresh air. The night was clear and starry. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the noise of the city, but here in my secluded refuge, there was silence. I looked at the stars and thought about Eleanor. What would she say if she saw what our daughter had become? What would she have done in my place? Eleanor had always been the peacemaker in our family, finding compromises and building bridges. But even she couldn't forgive such betrayal. She would defend herself, not out of revenge, but out of a sense of justice that had always been strong in her. I decided I had to act. Not just defend myself, but teach Gareth and Imogen a lesson they would never forget. Show them that the old prosecutor had not lost his skills and would not allow himself to be manipulated or intimidated. I returned to the house and sat down at my tablet again. Now that I knew their plan, I could prepare, gather evidence, develop a strategy, find allies. I had the camera recordings, contacts in the legal world, financial resources, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. Gareth and Imogen thought they were dealing with a helpless old man. They would soon learn how wrong they were. Before going to bed, I watched the recording of their conversation at the gate again. Gareth's words about Pine Grove sparked a new wave of anger in me. I knew this place not only by reputation. I had visited it once as part of an investigation. I remembered the smell of antiseptic mixed with urine, the dim corridors, the empty eyes of the old people sitting in chairs in the common room. And they wanted to send me there? Lock me up like in a prison? Take away everything I had earned in my long life? I turned off my tablet and went to bed, but sleep would not come. Images from the past and present swirled in my head, blending into a disturbing picture. Little Imogen laughing on the swing, Imogen in her wedding dress, proud and happy. Imogen standing next to Gareth at the gate, discussing how to put me in a cheap nursing home. The bitterness of betrayal was almost physical pain. But out of that bitterness came determination. I would not give up without a fight. I would not let them destroy everything I had built, everything I had earned. I would fight, not only for my freedom and my property, but for my dignity. With that thought, I finally fell asleep, already knowing that tomorrow I would begin preparing for the final confrontation, a battle I had no intention of losing. The morning began with a phone call. Bart Keegan, my old friend and lawyer, wanted to meet as soon as possible after I told him about the camera recordings. We agreed to meet at his office in downtown Tacoma at 11 o'clock. Bart's office was located in an old building overlooking Commensality Bay. In the 30 years I had known him, he had never changed jobs, only expanded from one room to an entire floor. His successful practice allowed him to choose his clients, and in recent years he had focused mainly on corporate law. But for an old friend, he was willing to return to family matters. "I've looked over the records you sent," Bart said, as I settled into a chair across from his massive oak desk. "This is serious, Thaddeus. Especially their conversation about the nursing home and using your money for Garrett's business." "What do you suggest?" I asked, taking a cup of coffee from his hands. Bart leaned back in his chair, his fingers clasped under his chin, a gesture I remembered from our first cases together. "We have several options. We could file a preemptive lawsuit challenging their right to seek guardianship over you. We could go directly to Judge Hammond. She's always appreciated your work and would surely want to help. Or, I urged him, or we can use these recordings as leverage. Invite them to a meeting and show them that we know about their plans. Offer them a deal." "What kind of deal?" I took a sip of coffee, pondering his words. "You waive any claims against them for attempted guardianship and fraud, and they leave you alone." A complete separation. Financial and personal, I shook my head. I don't want a complete break with Cormac. The boy is not to blame for his parents' actions. Then that will be part of the deal, Bart agreed. Regular visits with your grandson without parental interference. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the strategy. Bart thought it best to act quickly, before Gareth and Imogen had a chance to file for a medical examination. I agreed. There's something else, Bart said when we were done. I spoke with Vinnie Pendleton. She heard through her channels that Gareth is looking for a buyer for your old house. But it's already sold, I said in surprise. Exactly, Bart nodded. Apparently, he doesn't know that. He thinks the house is still yours and plans to sell it as soon as he gets custody. I smiled, imagining Gareth's face when he found out that the house had already been sold and the money transferred to an account he didn't know existed. Well, that will be another surprise for him, I said. When are we planning to meet? The sooner the better, Bart replied. Tomorrow evening? I nodded. At my house. I want them to see that I'm doing just fine on my own. After meeting with Bart, I went to see my old colleague, Judge William Prescott. Despite his retirement age, Bill still had influence in the Tacoma court system. We had worked together for almost 20 years, and I knew I could count on his support. Bill listened to my story in his favorite chair in the living room of his home in the Tacoma Hills. His wife, Martha, kept refilling our teacups but tactfully withdrew when the conversation turned to legal details. Damn, Thaddeus, Bill shook his head when I finished my story. I never would have thought Imogen capable of such a thing. I remember her as a little girl, coming to your office after school. People change, I shrugged, trying not to show how painful it was to talk about it. Or maybe I just didn't know her as well as I thought I did. What do you want from me? Bill asked bluntly. Support, if it goes to court. Your word about my legal capacity, and if possible, information about where the request for a medical examination might have been filed. Bill thought for a moment, then nodded. I'll make a few calls. If such a request has been filed, I'll find out. And of course, I'm always ready to testify to your competence. Hell, you're smarter than half the prosecutors out there. I smiled, grateful for his support. Thanks, Bill. That means a lot to me. The next day, I got a call from Bart. He had contacted Imogen and Gareth and invited them to a meeting at my house at 7 o'clock in the evening. To my surprise, they agreed without objection. They think this is their chance to convince you to accept their help, Bart explained. Gareth said he's glad to have the opportunity to clear up the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I smiled bitterly. That's what he calls it. I spent the day preparing for the meeting. I reviewed the recordings again, selecting the most revealing fragments. I prepared the documents Bart had drawn up for me, a statement of financial and property division, a legally binding agreement of non-interference in my affairs, and an agreement on meetings with Cormac. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, the security system notified me of the arrival of a black Lexus. I opened the gate with the remote control, watching on my tablet screen as the car entered the grounds. Gareth, Imogen, and, to my surprise, Mr. Whitaker, their lawyer, got out. Apparently, they had decided to play it safe. I met them at the front door. Gareth looked confident as always. Imogen was a little nervous, constantly fixing her hair. Mr. Whitaker kept a professional distance. Dad! Imogen took a step forward as if she wanted to hug me, but I stepped back, letting them into the house. Go into the living room, I said dryly. Bart is waiting for us. Bart Keegan stood up when we entered and shook hands with all three of them. His presence clearly surprised them. They hadn't expected me to have legal support. Have a seat, I said, pointing to the sofa and armchairs around the coffee table, where a folder of documents and a laptop were already waiting. Teddy, Gareth began as soon as everyone was settled. We're glad you finally agreed to talk. The last few weeks have been stressful for all of us. Indeed, I agreed, especially when you find out that your own daughter and her husband are planning to send you to a cheap nursing home and use your money to expand their business. There was silence. Gareth and Imogen exchanged glances, while Mr. Whitaker kept a neutral expression on his face. I don't know what you're talking about, Gareth finally said. We never planned anything like that. We're just concerned about your well-being. Really? I opened my laptop and played the first recording. Their conversation at the gate with Mr. Whitaker about Pine Grove and the use of my money. As the recording played, Gareth's face grew increasingly tense. Imogen turned pale, and Mr. Whitaker clearly felt uncomfortable. "Where did you get this?" Gareth asked when the recording ended. "Security cameras." I pointed to a small camera in the corner of the room. "They're all around the perimeter of the house and grounds. They record video and audio. They capture every movement, every word. Have you been spying on us?" Imogen's voice sounded accusatory. "No, dear." I looked her straight in the eye. "I was protecting my property from people who entered my house without permission and started dividing up the rooms as if I were already dead." Imogen lowered her eyes. Gareth tried to take the initiative. "Listen, Thaddeus, you're taking things out of context. Yes, we talked about a nursing home, but only as one of the options. And as for the money, I never planned to use it without your knowledge." "Really?" I played another recording, their conversation about selling my houses and expanding Gareth's business. When the recording ended, a heavy silence hung in the room. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Mr. Farnsworth, I must point out that recording conversations without the consent of the participants may be considered a violation." "Not in Washington state," Bart interrupted him. "Here, the law allows recording on private property by the owner of that property without notification, especially if there is suspicion of illegal activity." Mr. Whitaker fell silent. He clearly hadn't expected such a retort. "I have dozens more recordings," I continued. "Your visits at night, patrolling the perimeter, photographing the house, your conversations about medical examinations, full guardianship, selling my houses. All of it has been recorded, saved, and sent to a secure location." Gareth looked shocked. Imogen looked devastated. Mr. Whitaker maintained his professional composure, but it was clear that he was rethinking his strategy. "What do you want, Dad?" Imogen finally asked in a quiet voice. "Here, I said, pushing the folder of documents toward them. "An agreement for the complete separation of finances and property. You waive any claim to my money, houses, and other property, now and in the future. No attempts to establish guardianship, no interference in my life. In return, I will not sue you for attempted fraud and will not publish these recordings." Gareth opened the folder and began to look through the documents. His face grew darker with each page. "This is robbery," he finally said. "You want to deprive your own daughter of her inheritance?" "No," I shook my head. "I want to protect myself from people who see me only as a source of money. Imogen will receive her share of the inheritance after my death. Not before, and only if this agreement is respected." "What about the children?" Imogen asked, looking up at me for the first time. "Are you giving them up too?" "No," my voice softened. "The agreement includes a clause about regular meetings with Cormac, without you present. And with Tabitha, if she wants to come, I don't blame the children for their parents' actions." Imogen nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Gareth continued to study the documents. "What if we refuse to sign?" he finally asked. "Then," Bart interjected, "we will file a lawsuit for attempted fraud and publish all the recordings." Given Mr. Farnsworth's reputation in Tacoma and the content of these recordings, the outcome of the case is predictable. "As is the impact of the scandal on your business?" Mr. Holloway Gareth turned pale. His business was built on customer trust, and a public scandal could destroy his career. "We need time to think," he said. "You have 15 minutes, I replied. "You can discuss it in the garden. Bart will show you out." When they left, I was alone in the living room. Eleanor's photograph on the mantelpiece seemed to look at me sadly. I walked over to it, running my fingers over the frame. "I'm sorry, Ellie," I whispered, "but I have to protect myself." 15 minutes later, they returned. Imogen looked tearful, Gareth defeated. Mr. Whitaker remained professional, but it was clear he had advised them to agree. "We'll sign," Gareth said, "but on one condition. You won't publish these recordings under any circumstances, regardless of how our relationship develops in the future." I looked at Bart. He nodded slightly. "Agreed," I said. "If you comply with the terms of the agreement, the recordings will never see the light of day." They signed all the documents under the supervision of Bart, who acted as a notary. When the formalities were over, an awkward silence ensued. "Is that all?" Gareth asked. "Yes," I replied. "You may go." They stood up, ready to leave. Imogen paused for a moment. "Dad," she began. "Not now, Imogen," I shook my head. "Maybe someday we can talk." "But not today." She nodded, tears filling her eyes again. Then she turned and followed her husband and the lawyer out. I watched through the window as they got into the car and drove away. Part of me felt triumphant. Part of me felt deep sadness. It was a victory, but a bitter one. "Are you okay?" Bart asked, coming over to me. "I will," I replied, "in time." He put his hand on my shoulder. "You know, you could forgive them." "Start over," I shook my head. "Some things can't be forgiven, Bart. You can only accept them and move on." After Bart left, I was alone in my big house. I turned on the music, the jazz that Eleanor loves so much, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I went out onto the porch and looked at my garden, lit by the soft glow of the garden lights. A strange feeling of freedom filled me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of other people's expectations. Didn't feel the need to live up to anyone's ideas of what an elderly father, grandfather, and former prosecutor should be. I was just Thaddeus Farnsworth, a man who had decided to live the rest of his life on his own terms. The next morning, I called Cormac and invited him to lunch over the weekend. He agreed, unable to hide his joy. I didn't tell him about yesterday's meeting with his parents. That was a burden he didn't need to carry. Then I called Vinnie Pendleton and thanked her for her help. She was glad to hear that everything had worked out in my favor. "What's next, prosecutor?" she asked. "What are your plans for your new life?" I thought about it. After 35 years in the prosecutor's office and 5 years of mourning Eleanor, I could plan for the future without looking back at others for the first time. "I'm thinking about traveling," I said. "The places Eleanor and I always wanted to go but never got around to. Italy, Greece, maybe Japan." "That sounds wonderful," Vinny approved. "You deserve it, Thaddeus, after everything you've been through." That evening, I sat in my library, leafing through a world atlas and marking the places I wanted to visit. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive, full of plans and hopes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Judge Bill Prescott. "Teddy," his voice sounded calm, "I heard that the request for a medical examination was withdrawn this morning. Your relatives changed their minds." "Thanks for the information, Bill," I smiled. "I guess our meeting yesterday was convincing." "Glad to hear it," he paused. "Listen, Martha and I are having a small dinner party this Saturday. A few old friends, good food, maybe a game of poker afterwards. You should come," I agreed without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, the thought of a social event didn't make me want to decline. Maybe it was time to renew old friendships and make new ones? The next day, I met with my financial advisor and reviewed my investment portfolio. Now that I wasn't worried about preserving Imogen's inheritance, I could use my savings however I wanted. That evening, I spoke on the phone with Eleanor's sister, Catherine, who lived in Portland. We hadn't spoken in several years. After Eleanor's death, our contact had become sporadic. But now, as I told her about my travel plans, I heard a note of interest in her voice. "I've always wanted to see Greece," she said. "Eleanor talked about it so often." "Maybe you'd like to come with me," I suggested impulsively. "Company wouldn't hurt, especially if it's family." Catherine paused, then agreed. We agreed to call each other in a week to discuss the details. That night I slept peacefully, without nightmares or anxious thoughts. In the morning I woke up rested and full of energy.